Hello everyone, my name is Stephanie Boozer. I'm with CUGC HQ and would like to welcome you to today's user share. We're going to be talking about NetScaler Automation, NITRO, and PowerShell. Our format today is a presentation with a live Q&A, so we'd like you to type all of your questions into the question area of the GoToWebinar control panel, and that way our moderator can keep an eye on those and he will break in periodically and ask those questions. Also, I want to let you know that our presentation is being recorded and it will be posted shortly afterwards on mycugc.org. Our moderator today is Mike Nelson. He's a CTP and a CUGC member, a very active CUGC member. He helps out a lot on these webinars. And with that, I will turn it over to Mike. He can tell you a little bit about himself and introduce our presenter.
Thank you, Stephanie. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are. Welcome to this webinar. We have a great webinar content for you today. And as Stephanie said, I'll be handling all the questions. So if you have any, please post them into the box, and we'll try and cover them all. The presenter, Esther, will be breaking through her content every once in a while, and we'll take a few questions for her to answer. So at this time, I'd like to introduce you to Esther Barthel, who is over in the Netherlands, and she is a Citrix architect with Pepperbyte and a fellow CTP. Hello, Esther.
Hi, Mike. Thanks for the introduction. So I guess we're all eager to jump right into the content. So, oh wow, I already got the controls. This is cool. So let's just share my screen and make sure that we get the slide started. So, as already introduced by Stephanie, I'm sharing some NetScaler Automation fun with you guys. And let's just give you a quick rundown, even though Mike did a great job with that. Some of you may already know that I've been working as an IT consultant for over 15 years now, currently working at Pepperbyte, which is a small consultancy firm in the Netherlands. And since 2 years, I'm also a CTP. And even more recently, I became an MVP in January of this year. But what not everyone might be aware of is that I've been doing a lot of DevOps scripting fun for the last 5 years, working with different customers to automate Windows Server deployments and automate Citrix deployments. And kind of having a pet project to automate NetScaler configurations with PowerShell. So today I want to share with you some of the fun and lessons I've learned doing these PowerShell scripting configurations. And to make sure that everyone is aware of the basic knowledge, has the basic knowledge of what NITRO is all about, and particularly REST APIs, I'm going to run you through a small introduction first, and then switch to, I don't know if you can see that screen, but it's popping up. Hang on. And then run you through some of the configuration scripts that I've been working on. And if time permits and most questions are answered, I will run you through some bonus slide material that I prepared just to see if we can make sure that this webinar gives you all the information that is out there. So let's start with an introduction to REST API and NITRO. Hang on, having some problems with the screen. I'm sorry for that. If we are talking about REST APIs, we are talking about a client-server architecture solution or protocol, so to speak, that is designed to be stateless and runs on top of the HTTP protocol, which makes it very easily to use in firewalled environments. Because even though a lot of environments are protected and closed down by firewalls, mostly port 80 or 443 are opened up for different services. And RESTful APIs can take advantage of that. And if I'm talking about NITRO, I'm talking about the RESTful service that runs on a NetScaler, that allows us to communicate with a NetScaler in a programmatically way by using HTTP-based human-readable code. And even more particular, I can download some NITRO SDKs from my NetScaler that allows me to use even multiple programming languages, like Python or REST itself. And in my case, I've been using PowerShell to run native REST commands, calls from my PowerShell script to the NetScaler. As I mentioned, REST APIs and NITRO specifically is based on the HTTP protocol. And an HTTP protocol requires us to provide certain information to make that HTTP call to the server. And if we're looking at NITRO in particular, it follows the basic same syntax because it relies on that HTTP call. So I first need to provide the verb which describes the HTTP method that I'm using within my call. And I have several options for that. I can either provide the HTTP method get to retrieve information from my NetScaler, or I can use post to send information to my NetScaler. And if we are talking about NITRO, we need to let NITRO know what kind of resource I want to interact with. And I do that by sending an URL with my HTTP call, or sending the HTTP call to that specific URL. And each URL will start with the NetScaler IP address /nitro/v1. And then I have different options, because there are two different sets of information, so to speak, that I can interact with on my NetScaler. I can either use /stat to retrieve or modify some entity and system statistics, or I can use /config to do configurational operations on my NetScaler. And in this case, and in the examples that I will show you later on, you'll notice that I'm more focused on the config part. So I will add /config to the URL that I'm using to talk to NITRO. But that's not all, because NITRO still has no idea which resource, so to speak, I want to interact with. So I need to provide a resource type in the URL as well. And in some cases, if I'm addressing a very specific resource, I need to also provide the resource name. And if we are talking about the NetScaler features that I have used as a resource type in this example, there are two distinctive actions that I can perform on that. I can either enable or disable a NetScaler feature in my configuration. So I need to tell NITRO which action I want to perform on my resource. So basically, this is the entire URL that I can use and send to NITRO to make it realize and understand the action I want to perform. But that's not all, because as I mentioned, we're using the HTTP protocol, and that requires us to also specify some additional metadata information in our request header. In this particular case, I need to provide a content type to make NITRO understand what the formatting will be of the information that I'm sending to it. And I can use a formatting that allows me to define exactly which resource type and the JSON formatting, which is the JavaScript object notation formatting that we are using, which is very commonly used in REST API calls. Or I can use a more generic content type specification that allows me to be more flexible in my code, because I don't have to take the specific resource type into account. And last but not least, I need to provide some content in the request body that I'm sending. And in this case, I have added two JSON payload examples. And the one on the left, just making sure that I'm pointing out the right one, is the one that you can use to log on, to send the login information to your NetScaler, to make sure that you are authenticated for your session with the NetScaler. And the one on the right is an example on how to send load balancing fee server information to my NetScaler. So to sum it all up, I do need to provide some information or gather some information before I can make my REST API call. But basically, this is all the information that I need to enable NetScaler features. And as I will continue the presentation, I will make sure that I'll get back to you on this one. So Mike, are there already some questions or?
I have one question so far, Esther.
Okay.
One is pretty simple, I think, is that you specify that you have to have the NSNP address when you talk to NITRO, to the REST API. Can you actually change, I mean, will the REST API respond if you put in a VIP address or any other IP address that's on the NetScaler, or is it only the NSNP?
That's a good question, and I think we might skipping ahead one or two slides.
Okay.
But yeah, I've been using the NetScaler IP address because that's the most common, well-known IP address that the NetScaler has in my examples. But if you are using, for instance, an HA pair configuration, you might want to switch to the subnet IP address, or
Yes.
indeed have a dedicated virtual IP address for management. But
Right.
what you need, and let me just skip to the next slide, and I'll answer the question. I'll continue with answering the question. Because what you need is if we are talking about using NITRO, you need to have an account to log on to NITRO with executive permissions. And you need to have the management access enabled on your IP address. So in this case, it's the NetScaler IP address that I'm using in my examples, but you could use the subnet IP or a dedicated virtual IP, because it will link to the NITRO services that is running on your NetScaler. And if we are talking about NITRO requirements, as I mentioned, it's based upon a client-server architecture, which means that even though the NITRO services is running on the server side, in this case the NetScaler, I still need a client to communicate with NITRO. And in this example, I've shown you how I'm using Postman, which is a plugin for Google Chrome that allows me to quickly interact with NITRO and basically test the syntax of my JSON payload and see if I'm providing the right URL. But of course, NITRO can also be addressed from a programming language. And to make sure that there are different programming languages that you can use, there are SDK downloads available on your NetScaler that allows you to download the right SDK for C#, Python, and Java. And in my case, I'm using PowerShell, which means I'm using the native invoke REST method commandlet from PowerShell to directly make the REST API call. But there is some more information out there that you might consider when you want to start with your NITRO adventures. Make sure that you check out the NITRO API documentation that is downloadable from your NetScaler, because this documentation gives you detailed information on all the resource types that you can use if you want to do the configuration of your NetScaler. And it also shows you which operations are available on those resource types. And if we zoom in, for instance, the enable operation for the NetScaler feature, it will also give you all the information that you need to make that REST API call, like the URL, the HTTP method, and even the format of your JSON payload. And there is another useful article out there, because on the Citrix blogs, there's also a 5-part series on how to automate NetScaler configurations with PowerShell and NITRO. And that basically is what got me started with designing these whole scripts. Because if you skip to the last part, it will also provide you with a download link to a NetScaler PowerShell module that you can use to easily automate your configurations. This PowerShell module already contains a lot of basic commandlets or functions that allows you to configure these settings on your NetScaler. And I have to make a slight comment on that, what really helped me is that this PowerShell module from Citrix had all the basic functions to add new configuration information to a NetScaler. And I kind of geeked out and added a lot more functions to the module to make sure that I'm also able to modify, delete, or work with existing configurations on my NetScaler as well. And I will get back to you later on in the presentation on how you can get your hands on the module that I modified. But let's get into some more fun, and let me introduce you to some of the automation configurations that I've been working on. And I thought it would be a lot of fun to start with a simple example. As I've shown before, to make a call to NITRO to enable some NetScaler features, I need to provide this information to make that call. And the good news is that this can easily be translated into a PowerShell script by simply using that NetScaler PowerShell module. I simply import the module, and then I can use the enable NS feature commandlet that's provided by that module, which makes translating the previous information into a PowerShell script pretty easy. But to let you really see how easy it can be, I'm going to switch to my demo environment that I set up for this call. So let me know if you can all see the screen as well, because it should show you the Citrix logon page.
Yes.
So is that visible, Mike? Okay,
yep,
perfect.
We can see it.
Okay, well, before I'm going to switch to the actual scripts that, okay, I have them all lined up here. I wanted to make you realize that I'm using a crispy, clean NetScaler VPX by logging on to the NetScaler before I'm running any of the scripts. And what you'll notice is that I am presented with what I would, I like to call it the first logon wizard, which asks me to provide some common basic configuration information to my NetScaler. First of all, I need to do something with the user experience improvement program, and then it will ask me to add a subnet IP address, define a host name, DNS server, etc. And I'm not going to do that manually through the GUI, but I'm going to use my PowerShell script. And this script imports the PowerShell module that I modified. And to give you a quick overview of what I did is that I tried to make it more readable by dividing it in different regions. It has the basic information and a special commandlets to invoke that REST API call to NITRO, which provides some additional information and formatting. And I basically started to work on some traffic management functions. and even some system functions. And what you'll see is that I can now use simple scripts that will import that module and basically just run through a kind of workflow to set all the different configuration items step by step by using the command lines in the PowerShell module. And as I shown you, the first logon wizard asks me to either enable or disable the Citrix user experience improvement, and then it will ask me to provide basically the NetScaler IP is for me to retrieve it because that's already configured on your NetScaler, but it will ask me in the second step to provide the subnet IP, the host name, and the DNS address. So if we run this script, it will configure those basic settings. And just to make sure that it did indeed configure that NetScaler, I'm going to switch back to my NetScaler management console, log on again, and what you'll notice is that I'm immediately redirected to the configuration tab. So that first log on wizard that was presented when I first logged on is now skipped because I have configured all the basic settings like the subnet, IP address, and the host name. So that's pretty cool. Yeah, Mike?
Just a quick question.
No problem.
And I'm curious about this. Is that does a license require a reboot then after you apply that?
Yeah, that is correct. Because those that really paid attention saw that that was already checked when I first logged on. What the script can also do is upload the license file to your NetScaler, but to read it, it needs a reboot. So just for this demo, I decided to not do the entire reboot because that will take some time and require me to fill up that time with some funny comments, which don't always work out for me. So I thought, well, I'm just gonna pre-configure the license on the NetScaler.
Okay, the reboot could be handled via PowerShell though, so you could have that in your script to actually do the reboot, correct?
Yeah, that is correct. There is a reboot command as well.
Okay, and there's one other question I want to ask real quick is will you make or do you have these scripts available that you've created to the general public, or are you know how you can post those? Or
yeah, at the end of the presentation there is a slide with the URL of where because I created a GitHub space where all the scripts are uploaded and even the modified PowerShell module that I'm working with. And that's those scripts are being kept up to date. So if any requests are out there to add even more functionality to it, I'll work on that.
Great, thank you.
So to continue with the configuration, what I said in my example was that I was gonna configure the NetScaler features. And just to let you know that those are not yet configured on this NetScaler. So if let me just close this one. If I go back to the script, there is a second part that needs to be run, which enables some NetScaler modes and enables some NetScaler features. And just to double check, going back to the management console, you'll now see that the features that I did request it to enable are now actually selected and are enabled on my NetScaler. So that's pretty cool for a start, right? Let me just quickly go back to the presentation because I thought even though this is a nice example to give you an idea of how PowerShell works, it would be probably more fun to show you a more practical configuration, like for instance using NetScaler load balancing features to load balance a storefront configuration. And I try to give a schematical presentation of all the components that I need to configure for this to work. So what you see in this picture is in the upper blue line, you see the load balancing virtual server configuration for 2 storefront servers that are being load balanced. And I'm using SSL to communicate with storefront. So I had to make sure that the certificates are bound to that vServer as well. And of course, I want to make sure that I monitor the storefront service. So I'm adding a monitor to that as well. And then I thought it would be even more fun if you could look at the purple 2 lines beneath that virtual server. It would be more user-friendly if I could redirect users to the right storefront for web, the default storefront for web that I want to use. So I added some rewrite policies to the mix as well. And there's a waiting for the mouse to react. There's a second blue line, so to speak, that shows you a second virtual server configuration. This one is in place to make sure that users that are making an HTTP call are being redirected to the HTTPS call to make sure that they can reach the virtual server. And I'm doing that by configuring some responder policies and actions to it. So even though this kind of looks like a whole lot of components to configure, it is still a very basic NetScaler load balancing configuration. And if we translate that into PowerShell scripts to automate that configuration, you'll notice that my script will start with some of the rewrite actions and responder actions and policies that I need to have in place. It will continue by creating the servers, the service for the HTTP to HTTP redirection, and the service group that contains the 2 storefront servers. And last but not least, I need to make sure that the monitors and the virtual servers are created as well. And all the different components are bound to that virtual server, or the 2 virtual servers that I have in place. And I do realize that this is quickly running you through the script. So let's return to the demo environment and show you just how easily that script can be run and the configuration can be created. So I'm using a second script just to make sure that I'm not running into timeout issues during this presentation. That, as I mentioned, will configure the responder and rewrite policy and actions first, and then continue to create the servers, the services, service groups, and last but not least, the virtual servers that I have in place and bounding all the different components to that servers. So if I do run this script, it will start with some of the responder and rewrite policies, and then continue to create all those components that I need for my load balancing. So if we now switch over to our NetScaler, you'll notice that by running the script, and it tells me that the features are not enabled, but that's because the GUI was not updated yet. So let me just quickly do that to show you that the features are indeed enabled through the PowerShell script. It was just the GUI that didn't detect the change, so to speak. And if we are looking at the load balancing configuration on the NetScaler, you'll see that it now has the 2 storefront servers. It has the service group that I created to do the load balancing for the storefront service. It has the service for the HTTP to HTTPS redirection. And last but not least, it has the 2 virtual servers up and running. Well, not entirely up and running, because even though the HTTP to HTTP redirect virtual server has a status that is up, my load balancing virtual server still has a state that is down. And those of you that still remember the picture from the beginning, it showed you that as I'm using SSL to communicate with Storefront, I of course need to bind a certificate to it. And the script that I just run didn't have that certificate settings in it yet. But as I really prepared this presentation, I made sure that I also have a script to do the SSL configuration. So what the script does is it uploads the certificate files to my NetScaler. It then creates the certificate key pairs in my NetScaler. And I even, as I'm using a wildcard certificate that is linked to a root certificate authority, it even links those two certificates together to make sure that I have the entire certificate chain configured on my NetScaler. And of course, I need to make sure that the certificate is bound to the virtual server as well. So just making sure that I get the SSL configuration in my NetScaler, I'm running this script. And as you can see, it only takes a couple of seconds. And if I now return to my NetScaler configuration, it should show a server certificate, wildcard certificate, that is up there on my NetScaler. And just to double check my virtual server, you'll notice that it now has an up state. Because if we look more detailed at the configuration, it now has that server certificate bound to it. So that's pretty cool, right? With just a couple of scripts, I'm able to configure an entire load balancing configuration for Storefront on my NetScaler. So just making sure, Mike, are there any questions regarding the scripts that I've shown just yet?
The only question that we had come up was around where the actual PowerShell module could be downloaded. And okay. I pointed them to a Citrix blog article, which you referenced in your blog article. But I don't know if you want to open that up real quick and just make sure people know where to get that module.
Oh, yeah, the basic module. But what I can show you, and I will share that later on. Let me see, is that whoa, there goes my network connection. Okay, I'll get to that slide in just a few seconds. Hang on, guys.
That's fine, Esther.
Yeah, well, let me just, to make sure that everyone realizes that I have now configured the NetScaler to a working load balancing situation, let me just quickly show you that if I do go to that virtual server Storefront URL, and I'm using HTTP in my original call, it will do the HTTP to HTTPS redirection, and it will even add the default store or receiver for web extension to my URL as well. So this allows me, yeah, that's cool, right?
Yeah,
okay,
this is great.
This is working.
Automation, that's the way to go. So
yeah, definitely. Well, it's a lot of fun once you get a hang of PowerShell and learn to speak the language, so to speak.
Right. One of the questions that I thought about, Esther, was, and I know that well, I've discussed this with Barry Schiffer, who's another CTP and also a NetScaler person who is into the NITRO stuff, but was really around the practicality of using a script, unless you're doing a lot of deployments, right? Because it's an automation, or if you're a consultant like yourself that has to deploy, several different kinds of NetScalers configurations, at one location or something like that. A lot of people seem to like to gravitate towards the GUI, you know, and go click, 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 click through. But if you think about it, PowerShell is such an extensible engine that you would be able to actually, you know, create a form or an Excel spreadsheet that contained all the variables, you know, and then you would have a script actually suck in those variables or read those variables from that form or worksheet, and then be able to, you know, just build a NetScaler just like you want it. And something like that. I guess the whole conversation was around whether this is really practical for the single NetScaler admin, you know, to utilize, but it's more for, you know, deploying several NetScalers, or if you have an SDX or something like that.
Yeah, and well, I've been working with Command Center, for instance, as well to automate some configurations on my NetScaler, or use it to manage multiple NetScalers. But what I really like with PowerShell is that it gives you this very flexible and yet kind of template way to use to quickly configure either new NetScalers or build a configuration in your test or development environment, and then easily port it to a production environment. So it gives you a more flexible way of working with different configuration settings as you can reuse the script. Yeah.
Yeah. So we do have 2 questions I want to get to from the audience here. Mark Vincent actually asked, do you know if PowerShell can be used to automate SDX/SVM level commands? For example, changing admin profiles for NetScaler instances or running a backup of the SDX. So I think he's talking about the Xen server, the Xen server backplane.
Yeah, well, I'll just quickly go back to the presentation because I do have some bonus slides that will get into that. But there's another question, right?
Yeah, we'll tackle this one when you get to that slide, but I'll jump to the next one real quick. This one is how can the NITRO API PowerShell scripts be integrated with the Citrix Command Center tool?
Oh, that's interesting. Well, I have been talking, Command Center really uses the CLI commands. So using PowerShell for that, or integrating PowerShell in Command Center, is going to be hard because it uses different technologies where the Command Center pushes the command line commands to the NetScaler. PowerShell uses NITRO to do the REST API call. So that's 2 different mechanisms. So
yeah,
those
right.
2 will not be easily integrated.
Yeah, I don't think the command center actually. I don't think they're developing an SDK even for. So it's really kind of a closed architecture.
Yeah, and what you do notice is that with the introduction of NetScaler Mass, we now have a new platform that can also be addressed by REST API calls to manage our NetScalers as well. And I still have that on my wish list to look into the NITRO that is running on the NetScaler Mass to see if I can maybe even more easily use that platform to automate some configurations as well.
Well, we're going to look forward to that article when it comes out.
Yeah, definitely. I do have some more items on the wish list, but I'm slowly running through each and every one of them.
Okay, before we jump again to that slide about the SDX, it would be great if we could go into the other direction from Blake. He's asking, automatically create a PowerShell NITRO script from an existing NetScaler config that then could be used to replicate the existing config on a new NetScaler. If you think about it, you're just reapplying the config. I mean, if you create the ns.conf file, if you brought that in, you'd be able to use PowerShell just to deliver that to a NetScaler.
Yeah, and what I know is from the documentation script that Buddy Schiffer created, is he first started by downloading the ns.conf file and write kind of an interpreter for that. And he now switched to using REST API calls or NITRO to make it a more flexible documentation script.
Sure.
So I probably need to join forces with Buddy to get some of his magic on retrieving all the NetScaler configuration, and then write an interpreter that will be able to push that same configuration to the next NetScaler, so to say, speak. And I'm also looking at ways to maybe use all the variable information in an XML file and push that through the NetScaler or the PowerShell scripts. But that's another wish list action, so to speak.
Sure.
But to quickly go back to the presentation slides that I prepared, one of the questions was, where can I download the scripts that you just shown and the PowerShell module? Well, as I mentioned, I created a space on GitHub, which has the URL right there, that I will use to upload all the latest versions of the scripts that I've been using. And right now it has the latest versions are the demo scripts for Summit 2017 that I presented at last week. And basically the same scripts were shown today. So you can use that, and it also has the modified PowerShell module that I'm working on with the added feature. So it also allows you to retrieve that configuration information, make changes to existing configurations, delete configurations if you desire, and the scripts will show you how to work with that. So hopefully that will give you a quick start to do some PowerShell scripts of your own. And I did prepare a section for questions, but are there any new questions right now, Mike, or should I just go to some of those bonus slides that I prepared?
Yeah, there are none right now, so go ahead to your bonus slides.
So what I was thinking is that even though I'm having a lot of fun with the PowerShell scripts to automate the NetScaler configuration, I did realize that I'm still using an existing NetScaler VPX instance. So at some point I had to import that NetScaler onto a hypervisor platform, so to speak, and run that basic configuration to give it an IP address. That made me wonder if there was a better way to also automate the deployment of my NetScalers. And I did find this article on the Citrix knowledge base that gave me directions on how to auto-provision a NetScaler VPX on XenServer, because after all, we are talking about Citrix. So we're of course using XenServer. And it gave me kind of all the settings that I could use via the XE command. So I translated that by using the XenServer commandlet snap-ins into a PowerShell script that will easily allow me to make sure that when I have my NetScaler VPX imported on XenServer, I'll configure it with the fixed IP address that it will use when it first boots. So this allows me to not just be able to automate my NetScaler configuration, but also allows me to do the automation of the NetScaler deployment. Because if I can give it a fixed IP address, I know which IP address, the NS IP address, I can use for my configuration scripts. So adding another automation step to the entire process. And of course, I realize not everybody uses XenServer in production. So I made sure that I also found the right article to automate or auto-provision your NetScaler VPX on ESX. And that also was translated by using the PowerShell CLI snap-ins into a PowerShell script that will easily configure a fixed IP address for that NetScaler. And to get back to the latest questions, thanks to Project Silverton from Rick Dillinger, I had the chance to work with a NetScaler SDX. And going through the product documentation on the SDX, I discovered that I can also use the NITRO API, which is a modified version for the SDX, to communicate and make the configuration calls. And that also allows me to create new VPX instances with a fixed IP address. So basically, I now have all the major hypervisors configured as well to automate my NetScaler deployment, making it even more powerful, so to speak, to use PowerShell for my NetScaler configuration. And yes, I know that there's also a Hyper-V hypervisor. And there is a great article by Marius Sandou, who runs you through all the steps, but it kind of requires you to push some extra information into the NetScaler ISO that you can use for the hypervisor platform. So I haven't been able to figure out how to translate that to a PowerShell script yet. But who knows, that might make a very interesting article in the near future. So I hope that kind of answers the question regarding the NetScaler SDX platform, because I should be able, and I've just barely touched the SDX and the NITRO availability that it has, or functionality that it offers. So yeah, I should be able to make REST API calls to the SDX platform to change profile names and profile settings as well. So that would be a nice one to get more detailed info on as well. And basically, that's all the information I have right now on where I am with my PowerShell scripts. And I hope I got some of you very excited about checking it out, maybe even experimenting with your own PowerShell scripts, or really geek out and automate all your NetScaler configurations. So maybe there are still some more questions, Mike, because I do believe we have some time to answer those.
I don't have any in the queue, Esther.
Well, then I did pretty well, I guess.
Yeah.
So if you don't have any questions either, then I think we might give the controls back to Stephanie and see how we...
Wait. They're coming in. Okay.
Oh, nice.
So, yeah, just really quick. One of them is it possible to tap into app flow data using the NITRO to get the actual app flow data out of the... Yeah. I mean, then you're actually looking at the statistics URL rather than the configuration URL.
Yeah, that is true. And let me just quickly switch back, because I do have some... as I shown in the presentation, the NITRO documentation gives you not just the information on all the resource type for configuration. The /stat can also be used to get all your statistical app flow statistics, for instance, information. So this allows you to retrieve that statistical information as well. And what you notice is with the statistics, it's more about get commands to retrieve that statistical information than it is about pushing information to the NetScaler.
Sure.
So what you'll notice is that it shows all the metrics, kind of the same information that you get when you press the statistic button on your NetScaler.
Right. So that would actually be a good answer for the next question as well, as they say, what about reporting? So you could actually create scripts that pulls the statistics information and puts them into a report format that you know, any kind of a report format or some kind of a file where you bring it into another system for reporting. But if you use this the stats area of the API, you'd be able to pull pretty much any of the information that the NetScaler holds for statistics, kind of like what it sends over to Command Center. Is that about right?
Yeah, that is correct, because what some might not be aware of is that your the web GUI for your management console for the NetScaler kind of runs REST API calls in the background. So all the information that the GUI shows you regarding the NetScaler and the statistics should be retrievable through the native REST API calls as well.
Sure.
And I'm still working on, I have a colleague that kind of triggered me with an Excel report that had all the nice graphs and statistics in it, to look into that as well and see if I can use that to have like a custom reporting option through PowerShell.
Well, we'll look forward to that as well. I mean, Esther, you've got a lot on your plate. So, yeah, you better get to work because you've got a lot of stuff here that people want. So.
Yeah, that's what I realized.
Well, that's it for the questions. Stephanie, are you back online?
I'm right here.
Okay, can you take controls, or should I give them back to you?
Yeah, I'll get them right now. And you should see, nope.
We see the intro slide, yeah.
It looks like it's not my slide, but oh, I see why. There's two Stephanie Boozers. Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Esther. Thank you, Mike. That was a really interesting presentation. I think that I'll definitely ask Esther to supply some of her resources, and we can put them out on the CUGC forum for you guys after the webinar today. I've also put a link in the chat window to the forum thread that is where you can ask more questions if you want.
I can share the slide deck as well. That's no problem.
Okay, that would be great. So we'll do that, and right now I'm putting a link in the chat window to a really quick survey. It's anonymous, it's short, it helps us plan content for future webinars, and we always love to get your comments and suggestions. And I want to remind you all that the recording from today will be up on the website later on. You'll get an email from GoToWebinar with a link, just want to encourage you guys to come to mycugc.org to check out upcoming webinars, talk on the forums, read our blogs. We have a lot of blog activity at the beginning of the year. It's been really great. So with that, I'll thank Mike and Esther one more time and let you guys go about your day. Thanks so much.
You're welcome. Have a good day.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.